Unit 10. Exercise 1. One of the striking features of many invasions is a massive early population outbreak that makes the alien form conspicuous and often highly destructive. In some species, this outbreak may occur immediately after initial introduction. In others, it occurs only after a delay of years, decades, or even a century. Following the outbreak, however, the population of the alien, as well as its ecological impact, may decline substantially. In many cases, native species also make ecological and evolutionary adjustments that shield them from the impacts of aliens. In addition, the population outbreak of the alien creates massive ecological and evolutionary opportunities for exploitation by members of the native community. Ecological responses may be rapid as members of the native community learn to exploit the new community member as a food source and to avoid its direct detrimental influences. Later, evolutionary adjustments improve the ability of members of the native community to use the alien as a resource or to avoid the negative impacts of the alien. Exercise 2. It is useful to note that there are two angles to sport marketing. The first is that sport products and services can be marketed directly to the consumer. The second is that other non-sport products and services can be marketed through the use of sport. In other words, sport marketing involves the marketing of sport and marketing through sport. For example, the marketing of sport products and services directly to sport consumers could include sporting equipment, professional competitions, sport events, and local clubs. Other simple examples include team advertising, designing a publicity stunt to promote an athlete, selling season tickets, and developing licensed clothing for sale. In contrast, marketing through sport happens when a non-sport product is marketed through an association to sport. Some examples could include a professional athlete endorsing a breakfast cereal, a corporation sponsoring a sport event, or even a beer company arranging to have exclusive rights to provide beer at a sport venue or event. Exercise 3. Determining the probability that a particular event will occur in a particular location within a particular time span is an essential goal of hazard evaluation. For many large rivers, we have sufficient records of flow to develop probability models that can reasonably predict the average number of floods of a given magnitude that will occur in a given time period. Likewise, droughts may be assigned a probability on the basis of past occurrence of rainfall in the region. However, these probabilities are similar to the chances of throwing a particular number on a die or drawing an inside straight in poker. The element of chance is always present. For example, the 10-year flood may occur on the average of every 10 years, but it is possible for several floods of this magnitude to occur in any one year, just as it is possible to throw 2 straight sixes with a die. Hazard evaluation involves estimating the likelihood of events like floods or droughts in a specific time and space based on records, while always carrying an element of randomness with it. Exercise 4. Among the first studies to suggest the use of specifically a visual in contrast to verbal or phonologically based temporary memory for verbal stimuli were those conducted by psychologist Posner and his colleagues, who developed a visual letter matching task in which pairs of letters were shown in their uppercase, example A, B, or lowercase, example AA, versions, or a mixture of both, example BB. The subject's task was to respond on the basis of whether the letters in the pair had the same name, example AA, or had different names, example AB, when the letters were both in the same letter case and were physically identical, example AA. Subjects responded much more quickly than if the upper and lower case versions were different. The advantage for physically identical letters remained when letters in each pair were shown one after another with interletter delays of up to 2 seconds. This suggested that subjects were relying on the visual code for the letters during the delay, after which a name code was being used for the decision. Exercise 5 and 6. As more and more brands and organizations started working with influences, the return on influencer, yes, pun intended, has decreased. People realized that their heroes are being paid to promote brands on social media. The amount celebrities can get for promoting brands goes up to $500,000 for a mention in one single Instagram post. So, in the past few years, brands have slowly extended their influencer marketing strategies to so-called micro-influencers. These are people with 10,000 to 50,000 followers who are seen as experts or heroes to a smaller group of people. Because of the size of their following, their messages on social media are perceived to be authentic and therefore more trustworthy. As this strategy is also gaining too much popularity, several experts have predicted that the 2020s will be the era of the nano-influencers. These are people with 1,000 to 10,000 followers and who are just like your own most popular friends and family members. Their lack of any real fame will be a sign of their trustworthiness. The expectation is that this nano category will also eventually lose its authenticity, and trust will move to the last category, the pico influences. This is the category of people with less than 1,000 connections, the level of you, me, and my neighbor with her dog. These are the people that we know in real life and with whom we have a relationship. The interesting thing is that we have then come full circle back to where we were historically, when we trusted people who were actually very well known to us. Exercise 7. From an epistemic perspective, a central question concerns the extent to which advertising is expected to be truthful. Advertisements often use widely exaggerated or metaphorical claims, a practice called puffery, which, in contrast to misleading advertising, is legally permitted in some countries, for example, the United States. Its legality is based on the assumption that individuals will not take such claims literally or act on them. This assumption, however, is contradicted by empirical evidence that shows that consumers do in fact react to puffed statements. Even though some consumers may indeed recognize puffery as what it is, others are more vulnerable and take it at face value. This practice thus also raises issues of fairness. Is it legitimate for companies to make false statements that better informed or more reflective consumers will not believe, but others will fall prey to? Even sophisticated consumers suffer from such strategies, however, because they have to double-check which advertisements to take seriously. In an analysis of the treatment of puffery in U.S. law, Legal scholar David Hoffman argues that it should be understood as causing a negative externality. It creates informational burdens currently borne by buyers without compensation from sellers. Exercise 8. Environmental economists often aim to put an economic valuation on ecosystem service. The reason for this is that ecosystem services historically have been underconsidered and underappreciated in environmental decision-making and policy. Placing a monetary value on them increases their salience. The economic value of global ecosystem services is estimated to be $125 trillion per year. This puts into perspective just how crucial well-functioning ecological systems are to human well-being, as well as the extent to which human systems are intertwined with and dependent upon them. However, site or system-specific economic valuations are often more important to environmental decision-making than is global or macro evaluation. Not all ecological systems and spaces have the same ecosystem services and natural resource value. For example, an average hectare of open ocean provides fewer services than does an average hectare of reef, and an average hectare of desert provides fewer than does an average hectare of tropical rainforest. Exercise 9. Natural laws are not things that we can see or touch or hear. They are, according to Scottish philosopher David Hume, only descriptions of past groupings of events. For instance, consider the series of events: I let go of the pen falls, I let go of the pen falls, I let go of the pen, and so on. This series may be explained by a set of laws, such as gravity and inertia, but this series by itself simply describes events that have happened in the past. It does not tell us why pens behave that way, and it does not tell us that pens will always behave that way. And even if those past events happened because of laws, why believe those laws will continue to govern events in the future? If we say laws existed in the past, we need some additional law that tells us those laws will exist in the future. But it seems we can only describe the way those laws behaved in the past. Natural laws, which David Hume claims merely represent past grouping of events, do not guarantee future behavior, since they lack an explanation for their continuing validity. Exercise 10. Even though the universe is constantly inflating, it is still orderly. There are consistent rules that can be observed and measured. There are dependable physical principles that govern the relationship of one particle to another at varying scales. 300 years ago, the brilliant mathematician Sir Isaac Newton formulated the laws of motion that define the movement of large objects in physical space. These are the reliable and reproducible physical rules that allow us to calculate the accurate trajectory of an artillery shell or a rocket ship. These apply to the scale of objects that we can observe directly and are not microscopic in size. However, in the last century, a new set of quantum rules has been identified that govern how the atomic level operates. Some of these quantum principles contradict our ordinary senses. At this microscopic scale, The actions among particles defy our established expectations of clear-cut relationships between physical causes and effects. Instead, quantum measurements reveal inherent uncertainties about the relationship between one object and another. Yet, these built-in uncertainties are just as relevant to our lives as those Newtonian forces that govern what happens when two cars crash into each other. Exercise 11 and 12. Humans have an extremely extended period of brain development. This is especially true for circuits that mediate behavioral control, such as the prefrontal cortex, which do not fully mature until a person's early 20s. Until that time, synapses are still being modified on a massive scale. This provides plentiful opportunity for these circuits to be shaped by experience and is likely one of the key factors in our ability to successfully populate what has been called the cognitive niche. Rather than being adapted for specific environments with a limited set of hardwired instinctive behaviors, we have evolved cognitive flexibility and responsiveness, allowing us to adapt ourselves to our individual environments. Repeated patterns are reinforced and habitual modes are behavior emerged. We gradually become ourselves. But at some point, we have to stop constantly becoming and just get on with things. Important things like building a career or finding a mate. That means we have to consolidate the adaptations we have made and restrict further changes. We can't have runaway positive feedback loops forever. We have to maintain these neural configurations to remain ourselves. The periods of wholesale plasticity last considerably longer in behavioral and cognitive circuits than in sensory ones, but they still close as we reach adulthood. The plasticity processes themselves will have progressively narrowed the degrees of freedom of the developing brain, magnifying initial biases by both positive reinforcement and progressive elimination of connections mediating less favored states. But the biochemistry of the brain also changes with maturation, so that mechanisms of plasticity and flexibility get replaced by mechanisms of stability and maintenance.